The younger pilots laughed, calling her obsessed with the flight manuals. They had no idea she'd flown classified missions in an AH-64E, or that the protocols they joked about came from her own hand. She let their assumptions stand no uncomfortable questions, no forced respect from people who couldn't imagine what she carried. When a rookie's mistake nearly cost lives, she caught it before disaster struck. Her record too: 187 combat hours, 417 sorties remained invisible, even as she quietly walked away. But what happened when a simple design at the base of her neck changed everything? Some stories start before dawn, in places no one thinks to look. Long before the first engine test, she moved through the mechanics bay with practiced precision. Oil and metal clung to the air. She clocked in at 430, the only sound her boots against concrete. The chipped mug waited for her by the breaker box, always black coffee, always cold by the time she finished reviewing flight logs. The overnight crew left it as a silent nod to her routine. 2 lieutenants drifted past her workbench, manuals in hand. One paused at a checklist. "Pre-flight says check the hydraulic pressure gauge," he muttered. The other rolled his eyes. "We're rotor pilots, not engineers." Her fingers tightened on the torque wrench. That, line buried on page 62, had saved her crew at FOB Sharana during a tail rotor vibration emergency when the standard protocol failed and only the revised procedure in the NATOPS bulletin, the one with her initials in the changelog, made the difference. She wrote half those manuals, though no one here bothered to check the authors. At 715, a pilot traced his finger along the tail rotor housing she'd just inspected. "You missed a spot," he joked. She inhaled, counted rivets, and glanced at her watch. 12 minutes, until the engine tests just enough time to correct the throttle linkage the day crew had installed wrong. Her mind ran through the process. Field-tested steps, protocols built from mistakes she'd seen firsthand, each one a silent correction to the chaos of combat. Inside the cockpit, the familiar smells: leather, stale sweat, coolant-triggered old habits. Her left foot searched for the collective. She pressed her legs against the ladder rungs until the urge faded. No one noticed she never stepped fully inside, always braced against the frame, as if ready to escape. In the parts cage, her hands moved independently. Left, twisting a fuel line. Right, calibrating a gauge. The motions were slower now. In Afghanistan, she'd done this blindfolded, alarms blaring. A contractor from engines watched her grip the spanner. "You hold tools like CAS pilots do," he observed. She dropped the wrench into the box, ignoring the comment. At 1513, a warrant officer drilled trainees on emergency procedures. He tapped a quick reference guide. "If you lose tail rotor function." She crossed the hangar before thinking. That's wrong. The manual felt heavy in her hands. The officer hesitated. She pointed to the appendix, the revised NATOPS bulletin, her initials beside the update. "You counter the spin before reducing power. Do it the old way in an AH-64E and you'll be on the ground before the warning system even triggers." Her voice was steady, louder than usual. The officer recognized the authority. The trainees didn't. Later, she found the original error. Torque specs transposed in the swash plate assembly, the same mistake that caused the vibration incident at Sharana. She erased the wrong values, wrote in the corrected ones, the ones she'd calculated after the investigation. Her handwriting matched the first draft she'd pulled together in Bagram, the paper still faintly smelling of toner and sweat. The last training flight lifted off as dusk settled, following the emergency route she'd designed. She watched the Apache bank west, dust settling on her coveralls, thumb scar catching the fading light. The mug was rinsed and upside down by the breaker box, waiting for her tomorrow. A low rumble in the distance signaled a change in the air, the kind that made her pause, listening for something only she could hear. She kept her hands busy, sleeves rolled up as the rain came down in sudden sheets. A maintenance check became an exercise in exposure skin marked by old wounds, the pale ridges along her left wrist visible for a moment too long. The new avionics tech saw but said nothing. She kept working, tightening belly panel bolts, acting as if the scars were just another part of the job. Few on base knew she'd served with Black Ops Aviation. Fewer still understood what it meant to return with wounds no one could see. The body bore its reminders, but the real damage ran deeper, hidden behind routines and procedure. During engine runs, she always positioned herself where the torque gauge blocked her from view. When the turbines hit power, she pressed her hand to the chain-link fence, letting the vibrations mask the tremor in her fingers. The crew chief called it superstition. She called it habitone, more way to keep control when the old panic tried to break through. She'd learned to breathe through it. 4 counts in, 7 counts out, grounding herself until the world settled back into order. Her locker door hung slightly ajar, a white business card tucked just inside. VA Medical Center, Psychology Services. She kept it hidden behind spare gloves, out of sight but never far from reach. She'd gone once, sat in a waiting room with other veterans, all of them pretending not to watch each other. Treatment was a fact of her life now, like the scars, like the way she avoided mirrors in the early morning. The invitation to the Veterans Day event was still in her toolbox, filed away beneath technical manuals. She hadn't attended since the first year standing at parade rest, leaving before the gun salute could rattle her nerves. Sleep never came easy. The nightmare always returned. A countdown over the radio, fuel levels dropping, the heat pressing in. She woke at 537, knees jammed against the wall, heart racing, palms stinging from her own fingernails. 7 minutes of sleep. The same 7 minutes the rescue birds had been late to LZ Hydra. She'd learned to live with it, the way she'd learned to live with the rest. Rotor wash rattled the hangar roof during a training sortie. Her pen tore through paperwork as a socket wrench clattered to the floor, the noise sharp as gunfire. She steadied herself, breathing slow, letting the anxiety pass. The new kid from hydraulics launched into a war story, something about Kandahar and ammo cans. She turned the torque wrench too fast, snapping a bolt. "Get the extractor kit," she said, not looking up. In the simulator bay, she caught a rookie making the wrong move during emergency procedures. She crossed the floor in 5 strides, voice flat. "You flare at 70 feet, not 100. The wind shear will kill your descent." The instructor stared. The simulation froze at 200 feet too high, just like the day her tail rotor failed over Kandahar. She didn't wait for thanks, just walked back to her tools. When the rain passed, water beaded on the helicopter skids. She watched droplets slide down the composite skin, sleeves still rolled up, scars exposed to the open hangar. Some wounds faded. Others stayed sharp, reminders of what she carried. She moved through the maintenance bay, watching the pilot sailor for the smallest sign of danger, always weighing what she knew against what she could risk revealing. Knowledge, for her, was a burden measured in quiet corrections and silent warnings. In the hangar, Captain Calloway's laughter echoed off the tool cabinets, his new combat action badge catching the fluorescent light. He wore the badge like a Chilenja hotshot, with just enough experience to be dangerous, not enough to know what he didn't know. She recognized the way his thumb lingered on the metal, the same nervous gesture she'd seen in pilots, who thought confidence was a shield. The memory pressed in, the same look, the same swagger right before Kunar. She moved through the bay with a practiced eye, catching things others missed. The torque wrench felt wrong in her hand that morning, too light, just enough that a tail rotor bolt could shear under stress. She recalibrated it herself. No discussion, no paperwork. The secondary locking pin on the engine stand appeared overnight, welded in place without announcement. She marked the hydraulic inspection form with Condition Code B2, a subtle flag for anyone paying attention. It wasn't protocol, but it was safer. These small acts were her insurance, quiet interventions that kept others from repeating the mistakes she'd seen cost lives. The day's flight schedule listed Calloway taking Cadet Ramos up for emergency drills. Ramos was eager, unsteady 3 failed auto-rotation sims in a row. She watched him fumble the pre-flight checks, his fingers moving too quickly. At lunch, She slipped a folded note into his checklist. Cold temps increase VRS onset by 15%. Lead with left pedal. No signature, no trace. She didn't need recognition. She needed him to come back alive. Routine inspections brought the colonel down the line at 1,400. He paused by Apache 287, his eyes lingering on the transmission bolts she'd retorqued. He glanced at the logbook, then at her, but said nothing. She kept her focus on the canopy, polishing away fingerprints, letting the silence stand. The crisis broke just before 1600. Calloway, showing off for the cadets, banked hard at low altitude. The radio snapped. "Mayday. Mayday, we've got tail rotor oscillation." She didn't hesitate. Her hands moved faster than thought, entering her old override code into the maintenance panel. The aircraft stabilized in 3 seconds, the system compensating for the failure no one else had anticipated. The tower called it a minor anomaly. The colonel's stare followed her all the way back to the hangar. That night, she sat alone in the break room. Coffee, gone cold, the weight of what she carried pressing in. The details of her exit from active duty blurred, paperwork filed, questions unanswered. She'd learned not to expect justice, only the chance to keep others safe in ways that didn't make the official record. It was a trade she'd made long ago, one that never got easier. The next morning, Calloway was different. He studied the emergency procedures manual, eyes tracing each line. When she pointed out the overlooked paragraph on vortex ring state, he listened. His hand shook, just slightly, as he turned the page. The colonel lingered by the door, watching but not interfering. Her old rank felt heavy, a memory stitched into her posture. By early afternoon, Calloway took Ramos up again. This time, they flew by the book, no shortcuts, no bravado. When they landed, Calloway paused, catching her eye across the bay. He offered a crisp salute, sharp and deliberate. She nodded once, turning back to her tools, the oil stain on her coveralls blending into the background. Later, as the hangar emptied and the last echoes of the day faded, she found herself drawn to the simulator bay. A new system had arrived, its screens flickering with unfamiliar maps. Something in the programming caught her attention, a detail out of place, a pattern only she could recognize. The new simulator arrived on a Tuesday, shipped in a battered crate and signed for with a half-legible scrawl. She powered it up, expecting standard flight scenarios, but the display loaded approach vectors for LZ Viper terrain she hadn't seen outside of Herod, and certainly not on any unclassified system. The details were exact: thermal shadows along the eastern ridgeline, the same sequence she'd flown on those long, silent missions. Seeing her own flight path rendered on the screen, she felt the old tension knot between her shoulders, a digital echo of a life she'd tried to keep buried. She hummed a few notes under her breath, a habit from years ago. The flight line chief glanced over, recognition flickering in his eyes, but he said nothing. Her fingers tapped the rhythm against the console, the cadence steady and familiar. At 1,100, a test pilot keyed up the guard channel, and the squelch hit 243 MHz. Her body tensed at the frequency her old unit's medevac call. Instinctively, she adjusted the rotor track and balance gauges, grounding herself in the routine, letting the muscle memory take over until the tremor faded. In Hangar 3, she helped dismantle an old maintenance stand. As the last bolts came loose, sunlight caught a faded mark beneath the Grimea-stylized blade, the ghost knife insignia inked years ago at a forward operating base. She traced it with her thumb, the lines still sharp, a private reminder of the unit that never officially existed. She wiped a smear of grease over it before anyone else could notice. A visiting general from CENTCOM passed through the hangar, pausing for a heartbeat when he caught sight of her. His eyes lingered on the way she held the torque wrench, the set of her shoulders. He turned away before she did, but the moment left, the air charged with a quiet unease. She kept her head down, blending into the background, just another mechanic on the line. Later, archives requested her help with old maintenance logs. She paged through the 2011 records, her own handwriting jumping out from the faded pages. Block letters, the R in rotor, underlined twice. The entry detailed a tail rotor fix she'd devised after the second crash at Sharana. The solution was still in use, her signature buried in the margins of history. Every morning she checked fresh arrivals against the list in her head. Today's Apache carried tail number 85437. She ran her finger along the serial plate, remembering the 3 lost in Zari. It was a quiet ritual, a way to honor those names that never left her. The simulator crashed during a cadet run. As she rebooted, welders called her to the tail boom of battle damage 287. Embedded in the composite, they'd found 2 dog tags fused deep in the metal. One bore her name and blood type. She pocketed them, the metal cool and heavy in her palm, not needing to read the second tag to know who it belonged to. That night, she stayed late, running the Herat scenario. The system accepted her manual coordinates, the terrain loading as it had been moonless, silent, 2 disabled Humvees pinned down. She set the wind to match the after-action report, adjusted the enemy's position, and let the timer run. When the simulation hit the moment she'd broken formation, everything froze. A prompt demanded an override. Her reflection stared back from the screen, older, sharper, marked by everything she'd carried since. She entered the same coordinates she'd used that night. The sim ran to completion. 90. 2% mission success. No operator logged. On her way out, an owl called from the fence 3 short notes, the same pattern her spotter used to signal before insertion. The dog tags pressed against her collarbone as she walked back toward the maintenance bay, the night air thick with the smell of rain and metal, and the first hint of steam drifting from the overhead pipes. She worked in silence, jacket shed and sweat beading along her hairline, as the midday heat pressed down. A steam pipe hissed overhead, scattering condensation across the bench where she calibrated a fuel flow meter. She wiped her neck with a rag, not quite gentle, pressing over the ink at the base of her spine. The tattoo was always there, Raven's wings folded tight, a string of binary running through the feathers. Most never noticed. Today, a new airman from supply did. "That's SOAR-style work," he said, nodding at her collar. She shifted behind the hydraulic lift, voice flat. "A lot of pilots have ink." He didn't catch the detail that mattered. The binary code, her classified Ghost Knife 6 identifier, woven into the design. Only a few would know what it meant. The tattoo was more than a mark. It was a Kieselint proof of her time with the Ghosts of Anaconda, a unit erased from rosters in memory. When stress crept in during repairs, her thumb would trace the first digits acknowledge, a bort muscle memory from years of coded signals. The avionics chief saw it once and looked away. He'd served at Bagram, back when the Ghosts still flew. No one else ever asked. The base historian, tasked with cleaning up old files, noticed her unexplained leaves matched gaps in Task Force Anaconda's records. He didn't press. The silence was its own answer. In the hangar, she kept her routine, blending in until the day a sandstorm forced her to tie her hair up tight. Grit stung her eyes as she pinned it back, and for the first time, the tattoo was fully exposed. Raven's wings spread across her vertebrae, the binary sequence running down her neck like a coded signature. The colonel saw it from across the bay. He crossed the floor, boots echoing, and stopped beside her toolbox. He didn't mention the missing personnel file. Instead, he tapped the Raven with a grease pencil. "I flew with a Ghost Knife once." His boot scuffed the floor, marking out 33 to Rien's 65-degree Zari district. She met his eyes, and the moment passed, unspoken understanding settling between them. The next morning, her records reappeared. The civilian contractor label replaced with CW4, read a T. Combat hours restored, her call sign Echo beside her name. She left the correction untouched. All shift, the tattoo caught the light above her collar, binary code visible whenever she leaned over an engine. The numbers translated to one word: active. By afternoon, word spread quietly through the hangar. Mechanics glanced her way, conversations pausing just a beat too long. Even the younger pilots seemed to sense a shift. The tattoo was no longer just a secret, it was proof. And as the day wound down, the colonel lingered at the edge of the bay, watching her with a new kind of recognition, a silent invitation to step out of the shadows she'd lived in for years. The sun dropped behind the hangar roof, throwing long shadows across the concrete. She finished her last checklist, the code still tingling on her skin, and waited. The next move would not be hers alone. The colonel appeared in Hangar 7 near closing, a cardboard box balanced on his hip. He set it on her workbench without a word. Inside were mission reports, half the text hidden by thick black bars. She thumbed through the stack, catching fragments, grid coordinates for Jari, the word contact, and a single line her call sign, Echo buried in redactions. The files were a puzzle, each omission a reminder of what was meant to stay buried. He asked about Sangin, 2012. Her posture shifted, shoulders drawing back, chin tucked as if the helmet still pressed against her brow. "We had 12 Apaches on Mongoose," she said, her voice clear, no hesitation. The word "we" slipped out instinct, not habit. The colonel nodded, eyes narrowing. He moved on to Gunjgal, reciting the official line. Apaches held altitude for SAM threats. She cut in, hand sketching a flight path midair. Negative. We dropped to 800 feet. Marines marked the wrong LZ. The correction was automatic, the details sharp and unfiltered. He watched her, silent, as if recalibrating everything he thought he knew. Later, during a cadet sim run, the system crashed. She reached past the instructor and typed her old credentials, Echo, Reynolds, and a number without thinking. The login prompt vanished. The colonel, standing behind her, caught the sequence. His face flickered between surprise and something closer to recognition. By morning, her service record was back in the system. The numbers were exact. 180, 7 combat hours, 417 sorties, 3 air medals with valor. Someone printed the sheet and taped it to a locker. The pilots who had once rolled their eyes at her notes now glanced away when she walked past. At roll call, a lieutenant called her by her civilian name. She corrected him, voice steady. Chief Warrant Officer Reynolds. The words felt unfamiliar, but they fit. The change rippled through the hangar small, but unmistakable. The base commander called her in. His office was silent except for the faint scent of polish and cordite. He held her medal citation, the original Distinguished Flying Cross, between 2 fingers. "This was downgraded," he said, voice flat. She looked past him, her jaw set. "Yes, sir. The reason was never discussed. It didn't have to be." That evening, the colonel asked her to try Simulator 3. The system glitched through a series of failures: engine fire, hydraulics lost, tail rotor out. She flew each scenario by instinct, landing the virtual Apache when the manual said it couldn't be done. On the 7th run, she pulled the same high-G descending turn that had saved her crew years before, the one that broke regulations but kept them alive. The sim's frame shuddered. The colonel unclipped his harness, watching her closely. Nobody flies like that unless they're ghosts. His tone was quiet, but final. Mechanics gathered outside, listening as the old squadron frequency played through the speakers, static filling the hangar. She wiped her hands on her coveralls and picked up the radio. Static hissed. She keyed the mic and spoke her call sign echo into the silence. The acknowledgement light blinked green. The system responded at once, not needing anything more. The colonel touched the edge of her tattoo, the binary code visible above her collar. "Welcome back, Echo." The radio kept hissing, the air charged with something unspoken. Around her, the hangar settled into a new rhythm, and the pilots began to look her way with a different kind of attention, each one weighing what it meant to have her among them again. Respect in the hangar came at a price she hadn't chosen. After her record surfaced, pilots brought their checklists to her bench, voices careful and steps measured, as if proximity might reveal something they weren't ready to see. They asked about torque specs and fuel flow, waiting for her nod before moving on, but rarely meeting her eyes. The air felt heavier, every conversation balanced between admiration and discomfort. She answered questions without looking up, her tone clipped, knowing too much attention could make the distance worse. Small shifts followed her everywhere. Lunch in the mess hall grew quiet when she entered. Mechanics doubled back to recheck panels she'd already signed off. The crew chief's jokes dried up, replaced by a respectful silence that made her more of an outsider than before. Even routine tasks became loaded. Her initials on a quality assurance tag meant a second inspection, not out of mistrust, but because her reputation demanded it. The colonel found her near the parts cage, squadron patches in hand, offering a fast track to flight requalification and an instructor slot. His voice was careful, the words heavy with things left unsaid. She noticed the marks on his palms from gripping the patches too tightly. The official offer came in a sealed pouch, stamped and classified, as if her return required secrecy. She broke the tape with shaking hands, the words, "conditional reinstatement," blurring on the page. The noise of the break room faded to a dull roar, and she stepped outside before nausea could take over. She didn't answer right away. The idea of stepping back into the cockpit off being responsible again brought a wave of old memories, and something colder, a reminder of what she'd lost. Sleep grew restless, the past crowding in at odd hours. She woke with a racing pulse, hands curled as if bracing for impact, the details of old missions flickering in the dark. Some nights, she sat on the edge of her bunk, staring at the wall, waiting for her breathing to slow. The invitation to the memorial service for her old unit stayed pinned under a magnet for days. She read the names, each one a weight, then found the letter shredded one morning, unable to recall when she'd done it. She found herself helping in other ways. Second Lieutenant Dawson waited by her truck, voice shaking as she confessed she was about to wash out of flight school. The girl's hands betrayed her nerves, miming control inputs that were all wrong. Instead of advice, she handed over a checklist, annotated in the margins notes. Only a pilot who'd lived through the worst would know. Dawson took it, eyes wide, clutching the pages like a lifeline. That night, she launched a blog, no name, no rank, just a plain site titled Lessons from the Hangar Floor. The first post described how to spot vortex ring state before the instruments caught it. The next explained why certain NATOPS procedures could be bent for survival. Comments arrived from unfamiliar unit handles, questions layered with operational subtext. She answered each one, careful to keep her tone neutral, the advice practical. The subscriber count ticked upward, mostly new warrants and junior lieutenants. None of them knew the author's name, but the warnings read like the briefings she used to give before dawn. She still signed forms with her civilian name and wore coveralls, not a flight suit. But when someone referenced the anonymous blog, she didn't deny it. The work became a way to serve from the shadows, to pass on what mattered without stepping back into the spotlight. She watched the pilots as they prepped for flight, noting who lingered by her bench, who paused to reread a checklist, who hesitated before starting the engine. Each small interaction was a chance to shape what came next, to keep someone else from repeating her mistakes. The hangar settled into a new routine, the lines between past and present blurring. She kept her distance, but her influence moved quietly, woven into the fabric of every pre-flight, every checklist, every nervous question that found its way to her door. Lieutenant Vasquez lingered too close to the skids during pre-flight, hands braced on his thighs, tension in his posture. She adjusted the fuel pressure gauge 3 times before he caught her eye. Without a word, she stepped between him and the aircraft, demonstrating the proper stance, left foot back, weight balanced, hands open and ready. He mirrored her, a beat behind, then realized what he was doing and flushed. She pretended not to notice, moving on to the next check, but the lesson was clear. He'd remember that correction, long after the flight. The night crew left the NATOPS manual open to page 312 again. Cadet Lou found it that way during morning inspection, the section on emergency auto-rotation procedures highlighted in yellow. It was the same maneuver she'd seen Lou struggle with, the same one she'd failed herself, years before. She didn't say a word, but as she calibrated engine sensors, her pencil rolled off the table at just the right moment for Liu to spot the margin noture handwriting. A quiet map of crosswind limitations and corrective steps. Liu lingered over the page, absorbing the details, then closed the manual with a new kind of care. A recruit waited for her near the parts locker after hours, voice low and uncertain. "Chief, how'd you know if you were? If the mission was wrong?" His hands twisted at the end of his hydration tube, nerves visible in every gesture. She kept her gaze on the breaker box humming between them. "You'll puke either way," she said, voice flat. "One time it's from fear. Other time it's from shame." He stared, searching for more, but she moved off before he could ask which was worse. Sometimes, the memory surfaced without warning. Replacing rotor blades, she flashed back to her first combat, Sortiemus reading a dust cloud, hesitating, a medic lost in the seconds it took her to confirm what she already knew. Now, she drilled cadets to watch ground signals first, then check the scopes. The Army had revised the procedures since her mistake, but she taught it her way, the lesson earned in blood and regret. Her guidance stretched beyond the flight line. The blog she ran after hours, anonymous and spare, mirrored extraction scenarios she'd flown in Kandahar and Mosul. Each post broke down a lesson. How to spot vortex ring state before the instruments caught it, or why some procedures could be bent for survival. She watched as new warrants quietly referenced the blog, the stories spreading through the ranks, her influence working in the margins. When the notification came through that Warrant Officer Liu had earned the Air Medal for Valor in Mosul, she froze mid-scroll. The citation described nested landing zones, and an enemy ambush. She recognized the decision tree without reading further. That evening, she found Liu alone in the hangar, staring at the medal. She placed a photocopy next to him, her own citation. Same battle, same choices. He glanced at her, understanding passing quietly between them. During the next class briefing, she stood behind the lectern but never sat. Her weight shifted left, one foot ready to pivot, hand resting on the edge as if feeling for the cyclic. She refused the microphone, preferring her voice low and direct, never forcing her chin up. The cadets watched her stance as much as they listened to her words, picking up details they'd later mimic in the field. She saw Liu lining up for the live fire exercise, the approach angle too familiar, the same flawed assumptions that nearly ended her own career. She didn't shout or break protocol. Instead, she keyed the guard channel twice the old emergency override from her unit. Liu's Apache banked hard left, clearing the kill zone. The exercise commander barked about violations, but Liu's hand shook with adrenaline and relief. He never said where he'd learned the maneuver, but the next blog post on misunderstood ROE guidelines drew more traffic than usual. Some lessons were taught in silence, others with a glance or a coded phrase. She preferred it that way. The true measure of her mentorship wasn't in recognition or formal titles, but in the way her lessons endured quiet, practical, and always just beneath the surface. Late in the day, she moved through the maintenance bay, hands tracing the edge of a replacement part, the metal cool and familiar. She paused, fingers lingering on a serial number, memory surfacing in the quiet. The workbench lights flickered, catching the edge of the part where the original had failed. She pressed her palm to the metal, grounding herself, ready for whatever came next. Each aircraft in the bay carried its own silent history, but some bore more than others. She recognized the serial numbers at a glance, the ones pulled from wrecks, the ones with a story behind every scratch. When she installed a replacement swash plate marked 2876B, her touch lingered on the machined edge, remembering the night it first cracked near Musa Kala. No one questioned the origin of these parts. They trusted her judgment, unaware that some components had crossed continents with her, salvaged from the airframes of a squadron that no longer existed. Before every night exercise, she placed a coin under the landing gear of certain helicopters. Not a challenge coin, but an Afghani, its edges worn smooth by years of sand and heat. She left them for the rookies, a quiet gesture meant only for the birds most likely to carry someone into danger. The maintenance chief found them after each flight, puzzled, never guessing their meaning. For her, it was a ritual way to honor those who never made it home, to remind herself that every flight carried risk and memory in equal measure. The mess hall's PA system played a country song at lunch, the lyrics drifting through the clatter of trays and cutlery. When the chorus mentioned night stalkers, she froze, coffee cup halfway to her lips. She set it down and stepped outside, the sudden press of memory making the air in the corridor feel thin. She didn't return until the song faded, her hands steadying only after she gripped the cold metal of the doorframe. On her route to the parts depot, she began to pass the memorial wall more often. At first, she only glanced at the engraved names, letting her eyes drift over the panels as if checking her phone. Over time, she allowed herself to stop, tracing the letters of familiar surnames with her pinky. The stone held the warmth of the sun, grounding her in the present while tying her to the past. Each name was a reminder of what had been lost, and what she still carried. The visiting general arrived unannounced, setting a shadow box on her workbench. Inside, there were no medals, just a spent 30mm shell casing etched with coordinates from Operation Ghost Knife, the words, "Echoes Run," engraved in careful script. He tapped the glass once, a gesture of respect that needed no explanation. She nodded, understanding the weight of what was left unsaid. Later, Lou found her at the wall, notebook in hand, unsure how to ask for the story behind the hardest losses. She took the pencil, wrote 3 names at the top, then the coordinates, pausing as the first drops of rain hit the stone. The storm gathered overhead, the sky darkening as she filled in the final details. Lou copied each number, his pen moving slowly, the silence between them filled with everything that could never be spoken aloud. As the rain came down, she closed the notebook, the names and numbers now shared, no longer a burden carried alone. The hangar lights flickered in the distance, drawing her back toward the workbench and the stacks of maintenance forms waiting for her return. She signed the maintenance form in blue ink, CW4 Reynolds, the motion steady, the letters sure. Outside, sunlight caught the edge of her raven tattoo, now visible above her collar, no longer hidden beneath layers or shadows. The mark, once a secret, was now a symbol of acceptance past acknowledged, her service no longer erased. A warrant officer approached, hesitated, then simply nodded in respect before moving on. She returned to her tools, turning a wrench with quiet purpose, her presence a reminder that not all heroes need recognition to make a difference. Share the quiet hero you know in the comments, a veteran whose scars go unseen.